Hi, I'm Margie Morris. I'm going to describe a study that my colleagues and I did on risk negotiation in the context of COVID-19. This is a project at the University of Washington in Seattle. This research took place in June 2021. This was a period of conflicting health guidance. Vaccines had become available earlier that spring, allowing people to start planning to meet up with other people in person. However, the Delta variant had also just arrived, and that made it more risky to plan and to see people in person. The CDC had not reissued mask suggestions, but the WHO urged continuation of mask wearing, and similar conflicts played out at the local level in terms of health guidance. So amidst this conflicting guidance, individuals were really left on their own to navigate a public health crisis. We were interested in how young adults in college were navigating this situation and ultimately how technology could support risk negotiation. We were interested in this because face-to-face interaction is a pathway to belongingness, which we know to be valuable for mental health and academic engagement. And much of in-person meeting, particularly at that point in the pandemic, was planned through computer-mediated communication, principally texting. We conducted a probe study. In this case, instead of using physical artifacts, we used digital ones. These digital artifacts were designed to invite reflection, as Gaver's probes were. And our probes were designed to invite reflection on how all the ways that one could conceivably express desired precautions for an in-person meetup. We illustrated these through things like calendar invites, text messages, email, memoji, and so on. In an individual interview, we showed participants a range of these examples, asked for their reactions, and then for a week afterwards, nudged them to practice expressing their desired precautions as they planned meetups with anyone outside their household. We asked them to do this in ways that felt comfortable and natural to them, but they could draw on the probe examples as a reference. We interviewed them 1 week later to see how things went. Through qualitative analysis, we arrived at a risk negotiation framework consisting of strategies, complexities, and emotional outcomes. I'm going to touch on some of the strategies and complexities that led to our thinking about how technology could support risk negotiation. The strategies went well beyond the direct assertive approaches that were illustrated in our probe examples and that we anticipated. There were a range of approaches that participants used to protect others' feelings. Through indirectness, students tried to give the impression that the reason for a given precaution was something other than COVID-19. So, for example, saying, how about we meet after finals, when that was really intended to give the other person more time to become fully vaccinated. Or how about we sit outside for dinner because it's so nice out, when the real reason for sitting outside was to lower risk. Similarly, there was kind of reframing of explanations for why one wasn't doing something. One woman explained she wouldn't be going to church until COVID rates came down in an area. She did this very deliberately and avoided saying when she'd be going back when vaccination rates increased because she didn't want to suggest blame. Participants used third-party materials, things like vaccination card pictures or the CDC checklist in this case. So these were third-party materials from trusted authorities to broker difficult conversations. One participant described how she and a friend, while they were on the phone planning a way that they could meet up safely, each brought up the CDC checklist and interviewed each other about symptoms, behaviors, so that they could figure out appropriate precautions. Some participants did things like mixing in expressions of laughter, hee hee, ha ha, as you can see in this screenshot, with serious requests. And this was a way to appear more lighthearted and easygoing. To assess risk without directly asking intrusive questions, some participants surveilled the social media posts of friends or peers. One woman described how she and her housemates, did some detective work as they scoured a friend's social media account. This friend had asked to visit, and when they found pictures of her at a party without masking, they explained that that they would consider a visit at a later time. So there were a variety of complexities that made it even more difficult to negotiate risk than it might have been. So for example, there were power imbalances that participants were well aware of. Things like interacting with professors, employers, older relatives. And in this case, it was that's shown in this screenshot, it's interacting with a peer who was hosting an event. And the participant was asking that peer to communicate her desired precautions to other attendees and to get them to agree to those precautions. This was pretty anxiety-provoking to make this request and then to wait to see if the host would follow through. And this was a pretty common situation. Participants felt rude and invasive asking questions about health behaviors and also social interactions. They tried to assess risk. And even if they felt comfortable with the precautions they had arranged with one other person, they didn't know what risk there would be in the larger environment, whether that was a park or a restaurant. In addition to the complexities I just reviewed, there were ones that participants were less aware of. And the main complexity in that category I wanted to talk about was unchecked assumptions about shared health behaviors of peers. Participants spoke about unspoken agreements that they had or a confidence that they had shared health behaviors. And these were rarely checked except when there was a positive test result or some kind of scare. So as we thought about how technology could support risk negotiation, we considered things from crowdsourcing to AI-mediated communication. And I'm going to touch on some of those examples in AI-mediated communication. We've all become accustomed to nudges in our inbox to either respond to a prompt or to respond to an email that has been sitting there for too long, or to send an email again if it's been ignored by someone else. And in a similar way, AI-mediated communication could conceivably go through our exchanges to help us negotiate risk by examining whether there's evidence for a particular assumption, whether, for example, in the history of an exchange, there's things like vaccinations have been explicitly discussed, whether there are contradictions in what one has said or what someone else has said, or between tone and content. These tools could suggest phrasing for effective interpersonal negotiation and also prompt people to respond to other requests from other people in a way that might level the playing field. So to be effective, these tools would really need to mine the history of exchanges and probably do so across platforms, which brings up important risks. Most notably, the erosion of interpersonal trust and privacy. In addition, coaching that doesn't account for cultural, gender, or situational nuances could well backfire. And finally, such feedback would really need to be current to be useful. So these risks really need to be seriously considered as we think about how technology could intervene to support assertiveness. I do want to emphasize that I think that's an important area, given that this won't be the last pandemic or the last health risk to be negotiated. And there are many situations, some of which were brought up by our participants, from negotiating lease agreements to sexual safety, where greater interpersonal assertiveness would be helpful. I want to thank our participants, our reviewers, funders, and the research team.